So I've edited my presentation to be a little bit feistier, a bit angrier. I plan to speak for 20 minutes, and then because we've been sitting a while, listening a while to a lot of words, it'd be great to break into some small groups and actually consider some of the questions that is offered by today. The images behind me offer a glimpse of Civic Room, the building, the activities of the gallery, some of my family, and also some of the interests of the advisory who co-lead the organisation. Today I would like to mention that if this presentation seems a little tense or shouty, it's not because of the previous speaker, it's because of some of the tension that I experienced living in constituency in between Jeremy Corbyn and Emily Thornberry. The result is a pincer-type movement to the brain that many disillusioned supporters of the underdog dead dog party at the moment experience due to quick fix, short-term and egotistical campaign strategies. Anyway, moving on to today. The questions offered within the free market symposium have challenged me to think of three further questions. These three questions are abstract, fairly simple, but fairly important. What is the value of art across our many communities, here in Glasgow and beyond? How is the value of art and culture calibrated and interpreted in communal terms? Why is the transparent dissemination and communication of the value in art important? Those three questions we'll come back to later, and I would like your thoughts on them when we move into small groups. All of the above ask questions that are obvious. However, when we take a look at the picture of the value of art today here in Glasgow and how it is recognised for a moment, each of the above questions relating to value are presented in scenarios that are deeply caveated. Value within contemporary art exists somewhat hidden from view, misinterpreted, more than our in limbo, lost across the European airwaves, non-existent Great Repeal Act. I'll start also by introducing myself just a little bit more. I trained at St Martin's, graduated in London in 2005, and started Civic Room, a non-profit gallery on Glasgow's High Street in August 2015. My great aunt, Hannah Frank, that was good timing, created this artwork here. Hannah had to ask the rabbi, and interestingly, the local councillor, for permission to go to the Glasgow School of Art. How times have changed. My practice as an artist began by questioning human rights and everyday actions. My first project for the graduate show at St Martin's was to collaborate with a worker who was paid to stand in a graveyard holding a sign for a guitar shop on Denmark Street. Dennis was paid £2.50 an hour to stand for 8 hours a day and had to pee in the graveyard because he wasn't allowed a toilet break. Following the collaboration with the Brazilian sign holder, I continued to question human rights, specifically in London. And during the time of 2007 and the tragic terrorist incidents and the death of Jean-Charles de Menezes, I suddenly became more active. I asked Dennis, who is Brazilian, to comment on 3 metal security doors, his thoughts about the death of his fellow countrymen. One of the quotes says, "In case of doubt, the police shot anyway." This artwork was then placed in Tuke's chambers, which is the chambers of Michael Mansfield. Michael Mansfield carried out the Orgreave inquiry, also many of the Bloody Sunday inquiries, and is also famous today for the Diana trial. My inquiry and need to explore and reveal the power dynamics and hierarchy within institutions, public and private, and communities that they seek to serve began. Events and discussions in relation to the exhibition were arranged by a think tank, the Institute of Ideas. The Institute of Ideas holds a flagship festival, the Battle of Ideas, each year at the Barbican. And this really is the kind of space of discussion where cross-sector communication about important ideas takes place. What does an architect, artist, philosopher all think about immigration? Civic Room's advisory co-leads this community interest company that I run. And each individual, Toby Patterson, Jerry Grams, Paul Stalin, Ainsley Roddick, and Ian Carson, steers the programme. Each have a personal investment within the city. Ainsley used to run the Duchy, and that, as a result of the emergence of city properties, had to close. Jerry Grams had a huge master plan and international competition for the design of George Square. After the design was chosen, the council refused to implement it. That rupture marked the departure from Glasgow City Council. Paul Stalin is soon to be a neighbour in nearby college lands, working in a huge development opposite Civic Room, has spent many of his 25 years in architecture looking at some of the areas that we described around the outskirts of the city centre that are still in the process of grieving for their original home. Cross-sector working, for me in Civic Room, reveals a value in visual art. If we look at working across public services, education, health, recreation, and commercial sectors of trade and industry, artists can contribute here, and there needs to be a space for them. For example, Toby Patterson works as an artist, as we know. He also offers advice in a paid capacity to collective architecture. Toby can sit with collective architecture and their plans and contribute to the life and design of a building. An artist is more than a 60k cherry on the top of a 60 million building. The aim of Civic Room seeks to question connections and relationships between the built urban environment, our communities, and visual art within Glasgow. High Street is in a pre-gentrification zone, like many of the areas that have been described already today. However, Civic Room sits amongst 3 planning applications that are currently in process. A 17-storey student housing block positioned on High Street, opposite a private rental sector scheme in college lands, and immediately opposite a new Yo Hotel. One of my roles is to communicate with people like Greyfriars Garden, the local traders association, and the local pub to question ideas for a rapid homogenous development of yet more student accommodation in the city. Large-scale temporary buildings topped with Tesco Express are happening across the city, as has already been stated, at quite a pace. Unravelling the planning process is a part of the activity of Civic Room, hosting consultations with developers and actively inviting TROs, local businesses, to take part is an everyday part of working together on High Street. I don't advise getting involved with developers or planning unless you can deal with large amounts of stress. Civic Room offers multiple platforms of research for artists and collectives who are invited to delve into the history of High Street. Once the most important thoroughfare in the city, home to Enlightenment figures and the original Glasgow University, now home to Aldi and other architectural student accommodation disasters. Civic Room operates in 3 forms. We have a curated programme working with artists such as Andrea Komatsu for Glasgow International, and these opportunities really offer a huge insight into actually how other people view Glasgow. When Andrea came to the city, he was incredibly distressed when he got to the gallery and asked me, "What has happened here? Has there been a bomb?" I said, "This is not London, but let's look at the beauty together of a pre-gentrified city." We work with international partners too, and Gallery Vermeil and Gallery Continua supported this project. Unfortunately, their inability to come over and see the project is something that's challenging, and I'll go on to that later. We also work with partners in the form of Civic Room Open programme, and Civic Room Open really responds to the applications that we receive from organisations such as Glasgow School of Art to create a summer series which would enable everybody from a BA student to a PhD to take part in a show, 3 shows over the summer. This allowed artists, for some, their first step within an emerging career. I was quite challenged by the fact that many of the artists said that they didn't feel that there was space for them within Glasgow where they could show easily. I'll come on to that later also. Civic Room offsite is almost easier for me to work within than actually working with a gallery and its multiple needs and physical strengths too. The offsite project that I'm working on with North Lake Heritage and the Seven Lost Wetlands scheme will look at a radial line from the northeast of Glasgow, right from Hogganfield Loch and Frankfield Loch, right down to the Clyde. The Mollendina Burn is the river that created the city of Glasgow itself. One of the questions that we want to ask is, where is the cultural experience of people living in communities beyond the 2 square miles of the city centre? Consultations will not be part of the project. What we'd like to do is to share with communities and local community groups the work of international artists. Non-participatory, but an unashamed look at placing art in areas in which people don't normally visit. A cross-arts project including theatre, music, visual art, design and heritage will result. The theme of the project questions, what does progress mean today in the city? Future projects for Civic Room include working with the Scottish Refugee Council. Catalina, who's here today and co-convened the seminar with the culmination of her GSS residency, and a group show in 2018 with Sue Tompkins for Glasgow International 2018. Civic Room, and with the support of its committed cross-sector advisory, can offer an important stage in the artist's career and collective within the city. However, there is a decreasing space, it seems, of space available for artists to exhibit. So back to our questions. What is the value of art across our many communities here in Glasgow and beyond? How is the value of art and culture calibrated and interpreted in communal terms? Why is the transparent dissemination and communication of the value of art important? My caveat here is that I do not speak on behalf of DRS or Glasgow City Council, but speak as an individual. What is the role of public sector in terms of transforming this understanding of visual art and its value and importance across the city? With decreasing budgets, GOMA offers an example of an institution that's having to reduce its shows from 3 to 2 each year in some of its major spaces. And some of the challenging structural operations that are happening, where directors across major institutions become managers, losing some of their ability to programme. How is the role of contemporary art and culture valued across the city? What determines good value for Glasgow City Council requires much debate. More transparency is needed on how monies are spent, and also in regard to a cultural strategy that looms over the city that's decided by about 7 to 8 people who remain anonymous. Who's invited to participate in this group and why, and what are their results? Some of the good news from public sector is that Glasgow City Council and DRS have finally worked through a proposal to enable a host organisation to be the host tenant, providing short-term tenancies up to 1 year or 2 in vacant and redundant city property buildings. Watch this space. Hopefully it won't take another 3 years to organise. Artists and artistic organisations offer value in Glasgow to NHS trusts, education, environment. There needs to be spaces for collaboration within public sector, requiring nominal amounts of money and simply an invitation by them, not just an entrepreneurial approach by artists and organisations. Areas of transformation, number 2, commercial and industrial sector. Professional services and tech companies in the city need to support the visual arts community more in a spirit of collaboration, cross-sector projects and sharing knowledge. The visual arts sector would benefit from support in innovation and communication, finding and locating premises, and obviously accountancy and legal services. Cross-sector partnerships and placements within industry also are really a missed opportunity within the city. Artist placements in places like SGN Gas and the gas holders Tennant's Brewery, for example, some of our renovated shipyards and redundant shipyards. There needs to be new forms of artisan residence projects, new spaces for work. There are locations that are brimming with ideas. Residencies need to happen, not beyond the city in rural areas, but here within the city itself. Commercial galleries, could they play more of a role? Modern, Mary Mary and Kendall Cup, and more galleries across the world to represent our many artists who live here, who've made Glasgow their forever home. What's the responsibility of the commercial gallery within this discussion? Could there be a greater knowledge exchange with the next generation of visual art, of artists within the city and individual organisations, better mentoring, financial support? Can there be greater advocates for our sector? Can they stand up and say to Scottish Government, the visual arts sector within Scotland is underfunded and important? Glasgow is an international city, also is an area which could transform some of these ideas that we're discussing today. And I do mean, yes, Glasgow International Festival too. As an advisor to Glasgow International Festival, my job is to reflect not all but some of the concerns, vision and needs of the visual arts sector to the ops team and the new director at Glasgow International for the forthcoming 2018 festival and beyond. How can we represent ideas from this symposium within the context of Glasgow International? How can some of the transitory spaces that happen and are developed during the festival become more permanent? How can GI offer a better form of advocacy for the artists and the collectives who offer such generosity, skill and talent to the festival? Where's the payback for the people participating? Together, how can we transform our programming too to reveal to audiences a more representative and diverse international city that we live in? Glasgow needs more than the small change offered in the form of artist additions from our collective fundraising efforts from the major commercial galleries and institutions who represent artists who live here. Gallery directors across the globe need to visit more and their artists who live here. They're equally fascinated and in some ways indebted to the city, but a practical commitment of support is needed. Regeneration of the city as a whole and the role of visual art. I think some of the comments made in the earlier presentation I find quite challenging. There's been numerous and multiple phases of regeneration in the city, but in real terms, regeneration has not yet really begun. The story of a successful visual arts sector in Glasgow is sold across the world, from Munich to Cannes, in property festivals, where Glasgow City Council sets up stall and says to big developers, "Hi, come, build here in Glasgow. We're cool, vibrant, fresh and sexy, and we don't even have to pay our artists for it." That's clearly not what they say. Glasgow City Council, marketing and Scottish Enterprise need to turn round to artists and the communities who support them and actually make a form of commitment in terms of the language they use to describe how the visual arts sector is funded and how they actually support us. The inequality, this form of inequality, of the trading of the visual arts community, not just by Glasgow City Council, but by Glasgow School of Art, is a problem and actually stands in the way for a thriving visual arts sector to develop into a mature one. There needs to be greater transparency about how the sector is described. In terms of regeneration, the best form of regeneration is an organic regeneration by artists, and we know that. The impact of studios, the economic impact that brings, the community that it brings, creating mixed-use, independent, cultural and diverse communities. However, that form of regeneration needs support and cannot be at the agenda of developers, which has been alluded to today. Both space, long-term space and resources needed. Ultimately, the value associated with our thriving sector is marketed and attracts huge wealth to Glasgow. We do not currently receive a fair share of the resource that our work creates. Every artist across the city deserves a share of that resource. Thank you.